Falcon on comms. Repeat. Falcon on comms. The F-22 pilot scanned his radar, but the signal source wasn't from the cockpit. It was coming from the economy cabin, row 17. Confirmation, seat 17A. The woman sitting there had never piloted any aircraft, but thanks to a device hidden in her luggage, the entire military system believed Falcon had returned. NATO command lowered their voice. Target locked. Clara Falk. 36 years old, a German-Swedish history teacher, sat in seat 17A on a Paris to Rome flight to attend an academic conference. Her appearance was simple but attractive, wearing a long coat, brown hair tied back neatly, holding an old leather notebook. She carried a small rolling suitcase and a tote bag filled with student papers and teaching materials. Everything about her suggested an ordinary educator traveling for professional development. Nothing remarkable or attention-grabbing. Male passengers around her made teasing comments. "Where's the teacher going looking so delicate?" If you're not used to flying, just say so, and we'll protect you. Clara remained silent, only nodding politely when the flight attendant served beverages. Her quiet demeanor reinforced their assumptions about her being timid and inexperienced with air travel. When the aircraft experienced mild turbulence, she handed tissues to a crying young boy and showed him how to breathe slowly to calm himself. Her movements were gentle and maternal, exactly what people expected from a schoolteacher. An elderly woman struggled with her seatbelt, and Clara quietly helped her fasten it properly. Her assistance seamless and unobtrusive, drawing no attention to herself. An Italian businessman in the row ahead complained irritably about the cramped seating, grumbling loudly. "Someone like her would probably scream first if anything actually went wrong." Clara showed no reaction, simply leaning aside to let a flight attendant pass through the narrow aisle. Her passive response confirmed the passengers' judgments about her being meek and non-confrontational. The senior flight attendant took note. Passenger 17A was remarkably calm, knew how to handle small situations with competence, but nobody suspected this quality might become critically important. Throughout the boarding process and early flight, Clara maintained her role as the unremarkable teacher, someone easily dismissed and quickly forgotten by other passengers. Her worn notebook and simple clothing suggested a life dedicated to modest public service rather than adventure or danger. The Italian businessman continued his complaints to anyone who would listen, making assumptions about Clara's likely behavior during emergencies based purely on her quiet demeanor and professional appearance. Other passengers paid her little attention, focusing instead on their own concerns: business deals, vacation plans, family obligations. Clara was simply background, filling a seat, taking up space, utterly forgettable. But Clara's eyes, when they occasionally surveyed the cabin, showed something different. They moved with careful observation, noting exit locations, assessing passenger demographics, cataloging potential resources. Her awareness was methodical, the habit of someone trained to notice details that others missed. The leather notebook in her lap contained far more than lesson plans. Hidden within its pages were emergency protocols, crisis management notes, and psychological techniques for managing group panic. Her teaching career had given her expertise in human behavior that extended far beyond classroom management. As the aircraft settled into cruising altitude, Clara appeared to relax, but her mind remained alert, processing information, preparing for possibilities that other passengers never considered. Her calm wasn't passivity. It was readiness. The small rolling suitcase beneath her seat contained typical traveler items: clothing, toiletries, conference materials. But unknown to Clara, it also contained something else. Something that would transform this routine flight into a life-threatening crisis. She had packed carefully that morning, following her usual methodical approach to travel preparation. Everything had been accounted for, every item checked, every detail confirmed. She had no reason to suspect that her luggage had been compromised. The flight attendants continued their service. Passengers settled into books and movies, and the aircraft hummed steadily toward Rome. It seemed like countless other flights Clara had taken, routine and unremarkable. But in the cargo space beneath seat 17A, a small LED indicator was beginning to activate, responding to altitude changes and atmospheric conditions. The device had been carefully engineered to remain dormant during ground operations and early flight phases, avoiding detection until the critical moment. Clara remained unaware, focused on reviewing conference papers, occasionally helping nearby passengers with small needs, maintaining her role as the helpful but unremarkable teacher in seat 17A. The transformation from routine flight to international crisis was beginning, though nobody aboard yet understood what was about to unfold. A French passenger later recalled, "At that moment, I thought she was completely ordinary, but her calm gaze gave me inexplicable reassurance. Nearly an hour into the flight, the right engine suddenly jerked violently, the cabin lurching sharply as oxygen masks dropped in chaotic cascades throughout the passenger compartment. Passengers screamed in terror, luggage tumbling from overhead bins, children crying hysterically as their parents struggled to comprehend what was happening. The captain's voice came over the intercom, brief and tense. "We're experiencing technical difficulties. Please remain calm." But the cabin descended into chaos, several passengers shouting desperate messages to loved ones over their phones, others crying and praying, convinced their lives were ending. Clara stood up, her voice clear and authoritative like in her classroom. "Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold. Breathe out for 6. Everyone follow me." Gradually, the area around rows 16 through 18 began to calm, children stopping their crying as they focused on Clara's steady voice and rhythmic breathing instructions. An elderly man showed signs of low blood pressure from the panic, and Clara guided family members to elevate his feet, counting breathing rhythms to stabilize his condition. The senior flight attendant breathed with relief. "Passenger 17A is calming the cabin better than we can." Once people had stabilized, Clara returned to her seat, her face half covered by the oxygen mask, maintaining the breathing pattern she had taught others. Then something unexpected happened. In the luggage beneath her seat, a small green LED began flashing, emitting brief radio frequency bursts. Clara felt a slight jolt of surprise, assuming her portable battery was malfunctioning, but didn't investigate immediately because the cabin remained unsettled and passengers needed continued reassurance. High above, F-22 radar systems intercepted the signal. Call sign Falcon. NATO Command Center. Unknown hostile detected. Intercept orders pending. Clara and the passengers remained completely unaware that their flight had just been placed in targeting crosshairs, that military forces were preparing to engage what they believed was a hostile aircraft. The green LED continued its programmed sequence, transmitting authentication codes that matched classified military protocols, codes that should only exist in secure military systems, codes that identified the bearer as Falcon, a designation that carried urgent threat implications. F-22 fighters were being scrambled from their patrol positions, vectoring toward the commercial aircraft, weapon systems coming online, pilots receiving briefings about a potential hostile situation. Throughout the cabin, passengers were beginning to recover from their initial panic, focusing on Clara's breathing techniques, following her calm example. They had no idea that the real threat wasn't mechanical failure, but the mysterious signal emanating from seat 17A. The flight crew worked to stabilize the aircraft, managing the engine malfunction with professional competence, unaware that their technical crisis was about to be overshadowed by a far more dangerous military situation. Clara continued helping nearby passengers, her teaching instincts fully engaged, using every psychological technique she knew to maintain calm and prevent panic from resurging. Her classroom experience with managing group dynamics was proving invaluable in this crisis, but beneath her seat, the device continued its transmission, each pulse carrying authentication codes that were convincing military systems that a high-value hostile asset was aboard the commercial flight. The Italian businessman, who had predicted Clara would panic first, now watched in stunned silence as she moved through the cabin, speaking quietly to frightened passengers, demonstrating breathing techniques, providing exactly the leadership that he had assumed she was incapable of providing. Flight attendants began relying on Clara's help, recognizing that she had a natural ability to calm people and maintain order. Her teacher's voice, honed through years of managing classrooms, carried authority without aggression, reassurance without condescension. As the immediate crisis seemed to stabilize, passengers began to relax slightly, believing the worst had passed. The engine malfunction was being managed. The aircraft was maintaining altitude. Emergency landing procedures were being prepared. Nobody understood that the real emergency was just beginning, that military forces were converging on their position, that targeting systems were being engaged, that their survival now depended on factors completely outside their awareness or control. The green LED pulsed again, its signal reaching across hundreds of miles, activating response protocols in military command centers, triggering decisions that would determine whether 200 civilian passengers lived or died. Clara remained focused on helping her fellow passengers, completely unaware that she had become the unwitting center of an international military crisis, that her simple act of traveling to a conference had made her the key to a conspiracy she didn't understand. The device beneath her seat had been carefully engineered, designed to activate at altitude, programmed to transmit specific codes, built to create exactly this situation. Someone had planned this. Someone had placed it in her luggage. Someone wanted Falcon to reappear. And Clara was their unwitting pawn. As she helped a mother calm her terrified children, as she guided elderly passengers through breathing exercises, as she demonstrated the quiet competence of an experienced teacher, Clara had no idea that military pilots were receiving authorization to engage her aircraft. The cabin had achieved relative stability, but that stability was about to be shattered by a threat that nobody aboard could see or comprehend. The flight attendant clearly remembered, when the cabin was in chaos, passenger 17A stood up first to provide guidance, without trembling even slightly. Information about Falcon leaked into the cabin through radio interference. A few passengers catching fragments of military chatter, eyes immediately turning toward seat 17A with confusion and suspicion. Clara looked bewildered. "What's Falcon?" Then she remembered the green LED in her luggage, her heart beginning to race as pieces fell into place. She requested permission to open her suitcase, discovering a metallic box that definitely didn't belong to her, something she had never seen before. something that should not have been in her carefully packed luggage. Inside the box, a signal transmission device, attached to batteries and anti-vibration circuitry. Sophisticated equipment that looked military-grade and clearly wasn't accidentally placed. Clara stood frozen in shock. Someone had planted this device in her luggage during check-in, deliberately framing her, using her as an unwitting courier for whatever Falcon represented. The senior flight attendant whispered urgently, "If that thing keeps transmitting, we're going to be shot down." Clara's teacher training immediately shifted into problem-solving mode. She requested aluminum foil, steel trays, dry ice container, anything that could create a makeshift Faraday cage to block the signal transmission. Working quickly with flight attendants, they wrapped the device completely, sealing it in multiple layers of metal. The signal stopped, but military logs had already recorded Falcon on comms. Clara acted with quick intelligence, using her phone to record video, timestamp synchronized with the aircraft clock, creating evidence proving the device didn't belong to her, documenting exactly when she discovered it. She suggested the cockpit use cabin lights to flash Morse code to the F-22s, civilian plane/false ID/device isolated. The F-22 pilots observed the synchronized light signals, reporting to Combined Air Operations Center. Receiving coordinated light transmission. Recommend holding fire authorization. The first twist became clear. Clara was just bait. Someone with a hidden agenda had planted the device to create justification for military action, perhaps to shoot down a civilian aircraft, perhaps to create an international incident. The second twist was equally profound. The calm reasoning skills of an ordinary teacher had prevented catastrophe, demonstrating that heroism doesn't require military training, just clear thinking and courage under pressure. CAOC issued immediate orders. Abort weapons, escort only. The commercial aircraft transitioned from targeted threat to protected asset. F-22s shifting from attack formation to escort. Weapons systems standing down. Throughout the cabin, complete silence, as all passengers stared at seat 17A with expressions mixing gratitude, amazement, and lingering shock at how close they had come to death. Clara sat down heavily, her hands shaking slightly now that the immediate crisis had passed, the full weight of what had almost happened beginning to register. Someone had tried to kill everyone aboard, and she had been the unwitting instrument. The Italian businessman, who had assumed she would panic, was now staring at her with obvious shame, recognizing that his judgment had been catastrophically wrong. The woman he had dismissed as weak had just prevented their deaths through quick thinking and improvised engineering. Flight attendants secured the wrapped device, ensuring the Faraday cage remained intact, while Clara continued recording documentation. Her teacher's habit of thorough record-keeping had become crucial evidence in what was clearly a criminal conspiracy. Military investigators would later determine that the device had been specifically designed to transmit authentication codes matching classified Falcon protocols, codes that should only exist in secure military systems, codes that someone had stolen and weaponized. The question of who had planted the device and why would require extensive investigation, but Clara's quick recognition and response had prevented the conspiracy from achieving its goal, whatever that goal had been. Passengers throughout the cabin were beginning to understand the magnitude of what had just occurred. They hadn't just survived an engine malfunction, they had survived a deliberate attempt to create a situation where military forces would shoot down a civilian aircraft. Clara's teaching experience had proven invaluable in multiple ways. Her ability to calm panicked people, her systematic problem-solving approach, her understanding of how to create makeshift solutions from available materials, her documentation instincts that created evidence. The F-22 escort maintained protective formation, ensuring safe passage to Rome, while military and intelligence agencies began emergency protocols to investigate how classified authentication codes had been compromised and weaponized. Throughout the aircraft, passengers who had initially dismissed Clara as ordinary now recognized her as the person who had saved them, not through military expertise or physical strength, but through intelligence, composure, and practical problem-solving skills. The senior flight attendant made an announcement explaining what had happened, carefully omitting classified details, but making clear that passenger 17A had identified and neutralized a threat that would have resulted in military engagement. Clara remained in her seat, trying to process the reality that someone had deliberately targeted her, had used her as a weapon, had been willing to kill hundreds of innocent people to achieve whatever goal the conspiracy served. The leather notebook in her lap, which she had been using to review conference papers, now contained hastily written notes documenting every detail of the discovery and response. Her historian's training made her recognize the importance of accurate contemporary documentation. As the aircraft continued toward Rome under military escort, Clara began analyzing the situation with the same critical thinking she applied to historical events. Someone had access to her luggage during check-in. Someone knew her travel plans. Someone had chosen her specifically for this role. The question was why? Was she targeted randomly as a convenient courier? Or was there something about her background, her research, her connections, that made her specifically valuable to whoever had orchestrated this conspiracy? Military command centers were undoubtedly asking the same questions, beginning investigations that would trace every aspect of her life and connections. Clara understood that her quiet existence as a history teacher was about to be thoroughly disrupted by security reviews and intelligence debriefings. But for now, the immediate crisis had been resolved. The device was secured. The military threat had been neutralized. And 200 passengers were going to survive because a history teacher had remained calm under pressure and applied logical problem-solving to an unprecedented situation. The cabin remained quiet, passengers processing their narrow escape, many looking toward seat 17A with gratitude and lingering amazement. The teacher they had dismissed had proven to be exactly the person they needed in their moment of greatest danger. The Airbus landed smoothly at Rome Fiumicino Airport, landing gear touching the runway with gentle precision despite everything that had occurred during the flight. Emergency vehicles and security personnel were positioned throughout the arrival area. Passengers didn't applaud, instead standing quietly and stepping aside to create a clear path for Clara. The gesture was spontaneous and universal, recognition that she deserved honor rather than the dismissive treatment she had received earlier. The senior flight attendant carefully transferred the metal container holding the device to security officials, accompanied by Clara's video documentation providing crucial evidence of exactly what had been discovered and when. News of the incident exploded across media platforms. Falcon signal originated from luggage of passenger in seat 17A. Conspiracy to frame civilian teacher nearly results in military engagement. The Italian businessman who had complained about cramped seating and predicted Clara would panic published a public statement. A history teacher saved us from real missiles through nothing but intelligence and courage. Video footage of Clara wrapping the device in aluminum foil went viral, social media users calling it the teacher's Faraday cage. The improvised engineering solution became a symbol of practical intelligence overcoming sophisticated threats. Children began practicing the breathing technique Clara had taught, calling it the 17A method. Her classroom management skills had proven valuable far beyond any school setting, demonstrating that teaching expertise included crisis leadership. Parents shared the story with their children, explaining how an ordinary teacher had saved lives through quick thinking rather than physical heroism. The lesson resonated. Real strength often comes from intelligence and composure rather than force or aggression. Aviation security experts began analyzing how the device had bypassed screening, how Clara's luggage had been compromised, and what vulnerabilities in airport security needed immediate addressing. Her experience exposed systematic weaknesses that could have been exploited for far worse purposes. Military investigators confirmed that the authentication codes had been stolen from classified systems, representing a significant security breach that would require extensive review of personnel with access to those protocols. Clara's unwitting role had exposed espionage that might otherwise have remained hidden. Intelligence agencies across Europe began coordinating investigations into who had planted the device and why. The conspiracy involved sophisticated knowledge of military protocols, access to classified information, and detailed surveillance of Clara's travel plans. Clara's academic colleagues were stunned to learn about her experience, recognizing that the quiet historian they worked with had prevented an international incident through improvised engineering and crisis management. Her reputation in academic circles was transformed overnight. Students at her school began viewing their history teacher differently, understanding that the skills she taught about analyzing evidence, thinking critically, and remaining calm under pressure had real-world applications beyond classroom discussions. The conference Clara had been traveling to attend issued a statement acknowledging her absence was due to extraordinary circumstances involving aviation security. Her scheduled presentation on historical crisis management had become tragically ironic given recent events. Social media discussions focused on how ordinary professionals possessed skills that could prove crucial during emergencies. Clara's experience demonstrated that heroism didn't require military training or special credentials, just intelligence, courage, and willingness to act when others were paralyzed. The aluminum foil-wrapped device became an iconic image, representing how simple materials and clear thinking could counter sophisticated threats. Security training programs began incorporating improvised Faraday cage construction into their curricula. Passengers from the flight formed a support group, staying connected through shared experience and mutual gratitude for Clara's intervention. Many publicly acknowledged they had initially dismissed her as weak, learning a powerful lesson about assumptions and respect. The Italian businessman's transformation from dismissive critic to vocal advocate became part of the story, demonstrating how crisis could reveal both character flaws and capacity for growth. His public acknowledgement of being wrong resonated with audiences tired of people refusing to admit mistakes. Clara's leather notebook, which had seemed so ordinary during boarding, was now recognized as containing the kind of systematic thinking and documentation skills that had proven crucial during crisis. Teachers' habits of preparation and record-keeping had saved lives. The viral nature of the story sparked conversations about respect for educators, recognition that teaching required skills applicable far beyond classrooms, understanding that the people society often undervalued might possess exactly the capabilities needed during emergencies. If you believe that real strength comes from composure and skill rather than titles, type, "I will live kindly." When reporters arrived at the airport, Clara quietly left through a service exit, avoiding media attention and declining all interview requests. She had done what needed to be done, saved the lives that needed saving, and had no interest in becoming a public spectacle. People would remember only two words: Falcon. But this time, Falcon didn't represent betrayal. It became the story of a teacher who saved hundreds of people from conspiracy and violence. The lesson extended beyond the immediate crisis. True strength doesn't come from military rank or secret identities, but from clear thinking and leadership ability during moments of chaos. The greatest response to conspiracy isn't exposing perpetrators with dramatic accusations, but letting results speak for themselves. Clara's actions had neutralized the threat without needing to understand its full scope or identify its architects. The symbolic elements came full circle. Clara's worn leather notebook and the improvised aluminum foil shield had prevented catastrophe, demonstrating that ordinary tools combined with intelligence could counter sophisticated threats. Intelligence investigations eventually traced the device to a network attempting to create justification for military escalation, using innocent civilians as pawns in geopolitical chess games. Clara's quick thinking had disrupted plans that extended far beyond one flight. The Falcon authentication codes were changed throughout NATO systems, security protocols were revised, and new safeguards were implemented to prevent similar exploitation of classified information. One teacher's experience had triggered systematic improvements in international security. Clara returned to her classroom, where students now understood that their history teacher possessed real-world crisis management experience. Her lessons about historical events carried new weight when students recognized she had just become part of history herself. The aluminum foil Faraday cage technique she had improvised became standard training in aviation security, a simple solution that could be implemented quickly using materials available on any aircraft. Her practical engineering had influenced international protocols. Conference organizers invited Clara to present on crisis management, from historical analysis to real-world application, recognizing that her academic expertise and recent experience offered unique insights into how people respond under extreme pressure. The leather notebook eventually found its way to an aviation museum, displayed alongside the documentation Clara had created during the crisis. It became a symbol of how preparation, systematic thinking, and thorough documentation could transform ordinary citizens into effective crisis responders. Children throughout Europe began learning about the teacher in Seat 17A, understanding that heroes often looked ordinary, that courage could manifest through intelligence rather than force, that the people society dismissed might save lives when circumstances demanded it. The story sparked discussions about respecting all professionals, recognizing that diverse expertise could prove valuable in unexpected ways, understanding that a history teacher's skills might be exactly what was needed to prevent international tragedy. Military historians began analyzing the incident as a case study in how civilian intervention could prevent military escalation, how improvised solutions could counter sophisticated threats, how one person's clear thinking could change the outcome of conspiracy. Years later, when people discussed the incident, they remembered Clara not as a victim or even as a hero, but as someone who demonstrated what ordinary people could accomplish when they refused to panic, applied their professional skills to unprecedented situations, and remained focused on protecting others despite personal danger. True power isn't found in rank or aliases, but in keeping calm and leading others through crisis, letting actions speak louder than accusations. If you believe in stories that touch the heart like this one, leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe to SN Quiet Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. Real people are creating and telling stories, not mass-produced AI.